Hello and welcome to Elvenhome and to this edition where we really do get on building some of the scenery around the side of the canal. Having a look at the board on which High Elven sits and its relationship to the space in which the canal now sits, and some of the work that's needed to put the track back in place. I'll give you a better look at some of the scenic materials that I showed you in the last video. And I also get to run some sound locomotives so that you can hear they are sound locomotives. So let's get straight on and take a look at something that occurred to me almost as soon as I finished the video last time round. While I have this on the layout in a test rig form, I thought I would just show you the DCC automated controller for the points that sit under High Elven. I can't remember whether I showed this in any detail when I first put them onto High Elven. On my layout, all the other points are controlled with the old-fashioned Pico switches, which gives long runs of wire, inevitably. Although most of my points are pretty well contained in the major area around the depot. But I thought with High Elven I would have a go at using a DCC controller to change the points, to save me having to run long lengths of cables. The one I chose was the TrainTech PC2. I think TrainTech are now all available through GaugeMaster, so I think this is still available. And it is wired directly into the DCC bus, and at the moment that's being done by wires coming from the TrainTech to here, which is where the DCC bus comes up to take power for the tracks. And then you wire the points with the common in the centre and then the solenoid A and B either side. And instead of flicking a switch, you use the GaugeMaster handheld. And if I press accessory, I'm hoping this one is 29 and that it'll move. I choose 29, press enter, and I can use one or two to make it move. And hopefully it will do so. There we go. There's a bit of a lag, which is interesting, which I think must just be the distance that it's travelling. Hello, that didn't move that time. There we go. There we go. So I've tested all of them. The points up on High Elven are from 25 to 29, and they all work. So that's good. That means my soldering this afternoon has has come up to snuff. And what I will now be doing is positioning them under the headboard, the top board, which has undergone some change. So I think the next thing to do is to go and take a look at that and the changes that I've made to it. You may recall in the last video that I put the headboard up for High Elven and was showing how I'd had to increase the depth of the area here because the headboard was coming too close and not giving me room. And almost as soon as the video went up, I was thinking to myself that actually part of the problem also was the headboard was too big. And Gary Libsey from Settle and Carlisle YouTube channel made the same point in his comments, that maybe the board needed to go back more. So when he made those comments, I had just that, and was about 5 or 10 minutes before, finished putting all the track back onto the board to see where it came to. And as a consequence, the board had a bit of a haircut. And I've taken probably an inch or two from the far right hand side over there has come off, and I cut this back so that the track now comes to about here, but this has given me much more room around this basin side to put, not only to be able to fit the hill in, but to make the hill less severe, because it was increasingly looking as if I was going to have virtually a sheer cliff face, which, as you know, I did at the other end of the layout for High Elven, for Grey Havens. And I think I've got away with that one, but I didn't want to do that here. The other major change that I made was that you will see there are 3 holes cut into the board, and I've decided to fit the point motors directly to the track, because I did have problems when I fitted the point motors getting them to line up properly. When I did the whole board on which all the really serious and complex point motors are, they all went in beautifully. No problem lining them up. A minor adjustment to get them to line. And as some of you will know, if you don't line the point motors up absolutely at right angles to the track, it won't throw the points very well. And I had inconsistent performance of the points in High Elven as it was before. So I decided that I was going to cut holes and put these directly into the track. And that is why there are 3 holes. There are only 3, although I've got 4 sets of points, because one of them is so close to the edge of the board. If I point out which one it is, it's the one that sits here. The gap between that and the edge of the board is so fine. I thought that that was highly likely that in the cutting out you would end up chopping off the end of the board. So that one is going to remain as mounted under the board using, if I bring this up here, I can't pull it any longer because it's wide in, using one of these mounts instead. I think we'll be all right there, but I will see when I put it back on. The other thing that I've done up here, ahead of it being repainted, is that when I had to take it all apart, I had to remove various bits of cork, and those various bits started peeling. So I went into my stash of cork and was able to get all the bits done. There's one piece left to be done at the top, sort of almost in the center of your screen now, which is where 2 screws go down to hold the piece of wood underneath that holds the 2 parts together. But what I'm going to be doing next, I think, is fitting all the track on here and working out the wire runs underneath. The point motors that I've already showed you, the lengths of wire on each point motor I think are the right lengths for where I want to position this. This is going to be sitting under here somewhere. And I've worked out on the underside of the board so that it's entirely clear of the track. All the point motors underneath will be well clear of the track. They were before when they were all sitting on these little things. So I'm quite content that the 2 motors that are over there are well above the level of the track. And the aim, if I can pull it off, is that this can be lifted off completely in the event that I need to get underneath. I'm not so worried about track cleaning because I follow the Marklin of Sweden approach to track cleaning, which is if you use your layout a lot, you don't have to clean it much. And that is my experience. I do not spend hours cleaning my track. So far, I have not encountered major problems with that approach. But of course, I am in a room in a flat. I'm not in a loft and I'm not in a shed where the environmental conditions would be different. But in the event of something coming off around here, I am going to need to be able to get under there. And either I've got to make in some way the front piece here removable, or I've got to be able to lift this up gently a little bit. It doesn't need to be much to get my arm underneath, and I don't want to make it too complicated for myself. So that's where I am here. The next time you see this, I think we'll have all the track back in its place and all the wire runs sorted. Whether that's in time for this episode, I don't know, because I'm also doing other scenic work. Talking of which, let's go and look at what I've been doing as regards that. As you can see, more developments in this area. I was getting myself into my common position of thinking, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do this, and or if I do it this way, and I sort of went back to the phrase which is my watchword now, paralysis by analysis, that's the thing. And one evening, 2 evenings ago, I thought, we'll just do something. And the thing that was troubling me was how I was going to do this area here. And I was trying, I think, to make it too difficult as well, because I wanted this little path that wound its way down, and actually it didn't make sense, the little path winding its way down, because it wouldn't be a shortcut. Far from it. It would take longer to wind down the little path than it would to walk down the road, which would be a much easier way to go about things. So I went back to my pretty standard way of doing things for these kinds of hills, which you saw in part in a previous episode, about 2 episodes ago, when I built the hill that's down here. Pieces of paper scrunched up together and stuck on top of each other, just to give me a rough shape. On top of which I put plaster cloth, and I really like doing that because the wet plaster cloth sitting on the paper, as the plaster cloth dries, it just sort of sinks and buckles into a form which I couldn't possibly achieve if I tried. And so I like to just let it get on with it. On top of that, I then put the Woodland Scenic Shaper Sheet plaster, which is really rather good and gives a nice finish. Now, I've only taken it around as far as the bend in the road, because what comes behind there will be how I build it up to get to High Elven. And that I haven't got clear in my mind yet, though I think that will be work for the next couple of weeks after this video has gone out. I don't expect to get close to doing that with the other things that I'm going to be doing. So the next thing I think here is to start thinking about the scenic materials that I'm going to put on. And I think the easiest way to show you the stuff that came just before the last video went up is to do that at the desk. So I'll go through what I'm doing that in just a moment. While I'm here, the 2 locomotives that are running around are both silent at the moment. They're both steam locomotives. And I'll see if I can get the volume up better. I didn't achieve it very well. A running session where you can actually hear what they're doing. The little 4F, you may have thought you've seen before, but you haven't. This is a new 4F. My previous one started behaving erratically. So I got in touch with Rails of Sheffield. Within minutes, I had a label to send it back to them, which arrived at Easter weekend, so I wasn't expecting them to be able to deal with it too quickly. And I had a call last Monday of which week? No, last week, by the time this video goes out, to say that yes, there was a problem and a replacement was on its way, and that is here, and it is running beautifully. The Earl of Dunraven that's running round with its rake of coaches, that is the 5 coaches that came from Chris, and also 2 others that I found and bought from Ron Lines in Southampton. And they're beautiful coaches. They're pristine, nothing wrong with them, until I tried to fit the light bar. And there's no way you would have seen this without trying to fit a light bar. The previous owner of these coaches, because they were bought second hand, had changed the wheels on them to all metal wheels, and for some reason had decided to cut back the contacts on one of the bogies and grease the others. So when I tried to put a light bar in, there was no chance of any power getting to the contacts in the first place, but even if it had, there'd have been a straight short with the wheels, because on the Collet coaches they're insulated wheels. A call to Peter's Spares, and insulated wheels were purchased. One of the bogies has the contacts, and that's working fine, and as you'll see, they seem to be keeping lit. The 2 coaches that I've had to do that to are the first 2 behind the locomotive, and there's no noticeable flicker as they go around. but it was a bit disappointing when I put the light bars in and nothing happened. So it was a case of taking the whole coach apart to try and work out what was going on. So with that, let's go and have a look at the scenic materials that I've bought, which are going to adorn this area of the layout. In the last video, I showed you some of the things that I'd bought from Model Scenery Supplies to use to do the scenic work around the canal. And I thought before I started using them in earnest, I'd just show you them a little more closely. I'm not going to go on for hours about this, but just so you can see the sorts of things that I've bought. Two of them can be dealt with fairly straightforwardly. Although I have some 6mm grass, it was only either dead or patchy. So I've got myself some summer and spring grass. I don't use a lot of 6mm because in N gauge that's the equivalent of 3 foot, which is quite tall grass. And I think there would be tall grass here, but I just want that to add to my collection. The ones that I was really interested in were these two grasses, which is field grass, made by a company called miniaturereproducts.com and made in Vietnam apparently. And I thought they would make an interesting variation. I mean, obviously I'm not going to use it necessarily in the whole length because in N scale, goodness knows what that would be the equivalent in N scale. But it does look as interesting stuff to be able to put in and make tufts out of, or just put the odd strands in places, both dark green and natural brown. And then these three at the bottom, I thought were really interesting. This is, it reminds me of sea foam, I have to say. It's called Thicket Bush Burnt Green. It's by Footpath. And it does really remind me of sea foam, but it's been beautifully done. And so that I think will be really good to use. And I've only bought one colour of that, which is burnt green, because I've got other bits and pieces, but I think that will make a nice variation. And then these two, which are Lars Opthoff Scenery, which are dark green bushes, and this is the medium green bushes. And as you can see, they come on a sheet, if I turn it over, and you tear off what you need as you need them. So I think they're going to be particularly interesting to use and apply. And will give some nice variation amongst other things that I've got, so that I can build up the embankments in particular, but also a bit along the edges of the canal as it comes up to the lock. So those were the things that I've got so far to add to my stuff that I've already got, like lump foliage, the rubberized horsehair, which can be used and to great effect. So we'll see when I get onto that next week how all that turns out. So having taken you through the stuff that I've bought to do the scenic work, it's time now to allow the sound locomotives to give them their voice and to have a go with a new microphone to see if I can get more of the sound. The video that you saw in the last episode was meant to have sound on it because there were sound locomotives going round. But try as I might, I couldn't get the sound of up very high, which is why you couldn't hear anything and it just had a music track. This time the music track may be there but low, and what I hope you can hear is the 4F and the Castle class locomotives plying their trade around the layout. As you can see, since the last video, I've carried on working on the timber yard, and I think I'm getting close to where I want to be in terms of the amount of timber. I'd showed you in the last video the timber that's sitting around here. I showed you how I put together from balsa wood those light timber stacks. I carried on and made some more from the balsa wood. If I can get this to come into focus, there we go. That is exactly the same and is balsa wood. That's been mixed with the same, pretty much the same mixture, except, no, it's not the same mixture, it's completely different. It's been mixed with natural wood, a bit of burnt umber, probably 3 to 1, and then a tiny, tiny bit of black to give you the idea that this one is more weathered. I have to say, once I'd finished with this, I mean, this is balsa wood and it feels like balsa wood, but when I was putting it together, particularly where it's rough from the saw, and the way it looked, I just felt that it was going to be fairly rough timber, and was very surprised every time I touched it that it was very soft. So it's amazing how much the eye sort of controls things. Having completed 4 of those, I thought I would see what it would be like if I did use matchsticks. So these stacks are made from cut down matchsticks. Now, as you can see, these are much bigger. I mean, if you're a double O gauge modeler, they're probably about the right size. They probably are a bit big. Now, again, these have been dyed with a mixture where it was pretty much equal natural wood and burnt umber, and with a little bit more black, and then lots of water in both cases. And you just sit them in the water, give them a good dye, and then leave them to dry thoroughly. Because as I think I said in the last video, when you come to try to glue them together, if they're still the slightest bit damp, the glue can't go off. And so you have a terrible time trying to get them all to stick together. The other thing that I've been working on, and I'll ruin the impression, is to have some stacks of what, these are not yet painted, of what will be the logs, the tree trunks basically coming straight from the foresters. And my initial thought was, as I said in the last video, was to use cocktail sticks. The only problem was that cocktail sticks are too thin. That the cocktail sticks were thinner than the planks that I'd already cut there. Well, that's not possible. And so I had a look around what else was about, and bamboo barbecue skewers came to mind, which is what these are. They are about 300 millimeters long, so they're rather useful. There's probably about 4 or 5 skewers to make up this pyramid, which has 6 on the base. Now, initially I was going to leave them as the pyramids, but looking at images of yards, they're not really pyramidical structures. And although obviously when you put them together, so just before I started videoing, I put one of the pyramids upside down and a few loose ones besides, and I think that gives me a better look of a large stack of lumber waiting to be used. I think I've got enough lumber there. I think I want to do a bit more on the bamboo sticks because they're very easy to cut, and they obviously now need to be painted a darker, more of a brown than the silvery colour that's here. Though not completely brown, because tree bark, or very little tree bark, he said looking out the window, is completely brown. It has more of a grey silvery effect. And I will also want to put some of those long pieces in 1 or 2 of the barges as though they're delivering them, because that is the means by which they come in. I've also acquired this forklift, which is actually meant to be Western region. If I bring it into camera, this is from Oxford Diecast, just to give me something to be able to move the wood around. Ideally, I should have something which has the grabs on the end that they use to pick up logs. I can see nothing commercially that allows me to do that. So it may be that I'll have to have a go at seeing if I can construct something at some point. But until I can get a vehicle that is closer in kind, the forklift will do for the moment. At least it suggests more than just brute force for being able to move the wood around. And that, I think, I'm broadly happy with. It would be nice to have some more plain timber, but there's nothing really out there that's available, and I'm certainly not trying to cut it by hand, because that, frankly, would be a nightmare. So that brings you up to date with where we are on the timber yard, and really brings this video to an end. There'll be more in the next video, particularly in relation to High Elven, because since the piece you saw at the start of this video, I've had fun and games, I can tell you. But I think I have a solution, and I'm hoping by the time of the next video, High Elven will be back in its place and the track wired, not the whole thing with all the scenic work done. And I'll also want by then, I think, to have got the water into the canal basin, which means doing some of the scenery, doing the scenery around all of here, because I'm going to do the PVA for the water, I think, as the last thing, because I really don't want stuff getting stuck on it, and because that might be difficult to get off. So with that, if you've liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up. That's really helpful. And if you haven't already subscribed and you want to see the next stage in the development of this whole area, then please do subscribe, because it would be great to have you along. If you've got any comments, well, please do let me have comments. You're just so helpful when you give me comments, and I really enjoy responding to them. But until I speak to you again in about a fortnight's time, that's bye-bye from me. Bye-bye.